Defense, someone needs to get this message to the defense. If they can throw Hank Brennan curveballs, he's going to come unraveled. Any opportunity that the defense gets to surprise Hank Brennan, he's going to come undone. It's going to knock him so far off his game, he won't know what hit him. This man has every indicator of being overly controlling. And every time we've seen him lose his shit in the courtroom, it's when he feels like he's losing control. Watch the way he moves, watch the way he talks, watch the way he dresses. Everything he does, he has carefully crafted. And when it doesn't go his way is when he comes unraveled. And he comes unraveled because he's not in control, because he didn't anticipate what's coming. And now he's not prepared. So if you can knock this man off his game by throwing him curveball after curveball, you'll get the best of him.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, where we are currently featuring the Karen Read murder case. My name is Samantha Benigno. I am your host. I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a sixth-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist, and I am breaking down the Karen Read case, which I have been obsessed with now for about 1 year. Something's been bothering me now for a while. I want to say months. We hear quite a bit from Hank Brennan the phrase consciousness of guilt. And as a psychologist, as someone who thinks in terms of psychology first and foremost, to the point where I've actually had boyfriends tell me to turn it off because I never stop analyzing anyone at any time for any reason, I can't help but sort of ask myself, what does this consciousness of guilt really mean? Because what's obvious to me is that consciousness of guilt is sort of two fundamental ideas that are easy to conflate, that are easy to mix up. One is the psychological phenomenon of feeling guilty and having all kinds of behavioral manifestations as a result of that guilt, doing strange things. I feel really bad because I hurt somebody's feelings. So the next time I see them, I go out of my way to tell them how nice they look. It's the kind of thing where you might experience this, in a work environment where I accidentally make fun of somebody's outfit and the wrong person overheard me talking about it. And so I feel really guilty. And for the next 2 weeks, I'm bringing that person coffee for no reason and telling them how nice they look, right? So there's the phenomenon of feeling guilty and as a result, behaving in strange ways. That is consciousness of guilt. Then there's the legal phenomenon of consciousness of guilt, which is a completely different idea. And it turns out, as I investigated, it's a really important idea and one that is pretty much single-handedly responsible for approximately 160 to 200 wrongful convictions every year in the United States alone. That's since we've started to have more of an awareness of consciousness of guilt because of groups like the Innocence Project or the advent of technology like DNA and an awareness of wrongful convictions. Consciousness of guilt has come under greater scrutiny. And in the legal context, what that references is using someone's strange or suspicious behavior after a crime has been committed as evidence that they committed the crime. So a perfect example of consciousness of guilt would be O.J. Simpson in the white Bronco evading police, being caught on national television during a basketball playoff game, evading police in a Ford Bronco with a gun. threatening to kill himself and the limo driver, right? That's consciousness of guilt. That's probably the most textbook example that you could get. States have their own versions of what's acceptable and what's not, because, as I said, there's a greater awareness of wrongful convictions. Science has finally proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that there is no universal behavior for grief, loss, trauma, right? A great example, Amanda Knox. She was the woman who was, I think, doing like an exchange program in Italy and was convicted of killing her roommate, who she thinks she barely knew. Like, she had just gotten to Italy, if I remember correctly. And when they brought her in to question her just after the murder had been committed, she was like hanging upside down. She was laughing. She was just behaving in some very, very obviously strange ways. And that basically, in the eyes of law enforcement, told them she was guilty. They had her pegged from the start and they pinned it on her, even though she was eventually exonerated. One of the things that makes it a likely scenario for problems, when someone first commits a crime, that is when law enforcement has the most pressure on them to do something about it. All right. So if we think about Karen Read in this context, you go back to the first 24 hours after John's body was found, and we go back to Michael Proctor's text messages, we see that there's a lot of pressure on him and on the police to figure out what happened to John and to hold somebody accountable, to make it somebody's fault, right? Boston police officer just died on the front lawn of another Boston cop. We want to make sure that somebody's held as responsible and that it's not the person who lives in the house, right? So because there's a lot of pressure on cops, that also makes them more likely to make mistakes and to try to find somebody with urgency to hold responsible. But it also lends itself then to wanting so badly for somebody to be guilty that they start looking for evidence of that person being guilty. And this is where that whole confirmation bias situation comes in again. If I decide that somebody's guilty and then I start filtering their suspicious behavior through that lens, I'm going to see that as evidence of guilt, as consciousness of guilt. This is what I was saying earlier about the way Hank Brennan is approaching this case. He's decided, I've already got the outcome I want figured out. So now I just have to move the pieces around to make sure that they fit my narrative. The problem with that is that's how all these people, that's how 162 people were turned out, were convicted of crimes in 2021 that they did not commit. Not all states have the same laws about consciousness of guilt. And in the state of Massachusetts, where Karen Read is in court, where her trial is underway, you can only introduce consciousness of guilt or evidence of consciousness of guilt if there are other more legitimate pieces of evidence to support that claim. But this is a funky gray area, right? Obviously, and we see this with everything in the Karen Read trial because we have to rely on Judge Beverly Cannoni, God help us all, to make decisions about where is the line and where do these pieces of evidence fall within the law. So even though there's law on these things and the two lawyers can argue law, she's the judge. That's her job. The job of the judge is to decide how to interpret the law based on the arguments that are presented by the attorneys. That's the problem. So let's take a look at the law. Let's start with New York. So in New York, consciousness of guilt 4.20.3 means the following: evidence of post-crime conduct that may, in the context of a particular case, evince a defendant's consciousness of guilt of the offense with which the defendant is charged is admissible. A consciousness of guilt may, for example, be evidenced by a false alibi or explanation of one's actions, intimidation of a witness, destruction or concealment of evidence, or flight. Number two, A defendant may introduce evidence of an innocent explanation for the conduct in order to rebut the inference of consciousness of guilt. Number 3, a jury should be advised of the limited probative value of consciousness of guilt evidence and must be so advised upon request of the defendant. Okay, that's the New York law. Let's take a closer look at the Massachusetts law. And this is even more interesting. So there are essentially key ways that consciousness of guilt is allowed in the state of Massachusetts under the condition of flight. So did that person flee after discovering that they were about to be arrested? Okay. Did that person make false statements, that they may have intentionally made certain false statements before, after, or during their arrest? Did they give a false name, may have used a false name to conceal their identity, like told the police that they were somebody else to avoid being arrested? May have tampered with evidence, may have intentionally tried to conceal, destroy, or falsify evidence in this case, and or witness intimidation or bribery, may have intentionally attempted to intimidate, coerce, bribe a witness whom the defendant believed would testify against them. Now, if you think about the arguments that Hank Brennan has been making, these 5 pieces fit perfectly. For example, we heard a lot about consciousness of guilt when he was trying to get the text message exchanges between Turtle Boy and Karen Reed, that they were going to produce consciousness of guilt. He loves to say that, even though the grand jury made it very clear that there was no evidence of consciousness of guilt, that they were not trying to stop the witnesses from testifying against Karen because they knew she was guilty. But again, Hank Brennan is he's starting with the assertion that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe and then has to make all the evidence fit. So again, today, he was making the argument that these statements that he keeps showing, Karen Reed's own statements, these little tiny clips, I mean, they're seconds, little clips, of course, completely taken out of context. And not only are they taken out of context, he is deliberately placing them in the context that he wants them to appear in the sequence of events in the trial. So, for example, he is deciding, okay, today we're going to have Carrie Roberts testify. Then I'm going to show a clip of something that Karen Reed said about the taillight. Then we'll have Peg O'Keefe testify. Then I'm going to play a clip of something that she said about Peg O'Keefe. So not only is he using Karen's words, and I mean, and we're going to take a look here in a minute, but I'm talking about seconds, like little tiny clips of statements that she's made on Dateline or, to different producers or whatever, to Gretchen Voss, different interviews that she's given. But he's placing them in a very specific context. Like, for example, and we're going to see this now, he brings Peg O'Keefe on the stand, and then, and of course, that was what is referred to as a sympathy witness, somebody who is really just brought on board to pull on the heartstrings of the jury, which is a very common phenomenon to my understanding. And it's very effective. I mean, I felt myself actually liking her more than I had before. I certainly had no reason not to like her, but getting to see her come alive and answer questions made her far more likable in my mind. And that does have an impact on us, of course. I mean, all of this, I've talked about this ad nauseum, but emotion is what drives every thought in our head. So of course it's effective to bring on a sympathetic witness. And of course the jury doesn't, wants her to be justice for this family. Right. And so of course that's something that the jurors are going to consider when they're deliberating on this case. But for Brennan to try to not only leverage that, but then leverage that by immediately thereafter playing a clip out of context of something that Karen Reed has said, not only is on its face incredibly misleading and totally speculative, he's now giving it context. He's giving her statements context, even though that is completely not at all where they really were in context in real time. In other words, whatever she was talking about when she was being interviewed may or may not have anything to do with what's going on in court as he is bringing up these clips. And so obviously they're meant to be prejudicial, to make the jurors feel some way about Karen. And then Hank, is trying to make the argument that no, this is evidence of consciousness of guilt. And I'm going to let you hear him make the argument today himself. But just to try to help you sort through it, because really I was having a hard time making sense of what all of this means, because again, I'm not a lawyer, obviously. And because I am a psychologist, because psychology is the frame that I come at everything with, I was conflating what this means, consciousness of guilt, as though it's just suspicious behavior, period, when that is not the case. In this context, it means something very specific. It means one of these 5 types of behaviors that occur after a crime has been committed. Here they are again. Flight. Did that person flee after discovering that they were about to be arrested or charged with a crime? Did that person make false statements? May they have intentionally misled law enforcement before, after, or during an arrest? A false name. Did they give a false name, right? So that they could avoid being arrested by concealing their identity? Did they tamper with evidence? Did they intentionally try to conceal, destroy, or falsify evidence in the case? And were they engaging in witness intimidation or bribery, right? Were they attempting to intimidate, coerce, or bribe a witness in the case? Those are the only situations in the state of Massachusetts where consciousness of guilt behavior can be brought into court only if it is also if there's other supporting evidence, to suggest that that person is guilty of the crime in question. So by themselves, those are not supposed to be taken into consideration. They are supposed to be taken into consideration with other supporting evidence. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take a listen to Hank Brennan and what he was saying to the judge about whether or not he could show these clips to the jury. So this is a hearing. This is outside of the presence of the jury. And this is a question the lawyers are arguing about whether or not these 2 video clips can be viewed by the jury the way that Brennan would like for them to be.
So, Ms. Gilman, if you play that first one, please.
They had pulled into the driveway before me, so I was presuming she saw my cracked taillight and was thinking, did you hit my son? I could sense from her that she was looking at me very warily. And then when John's nephew came home, I just wanted to see him. And so it was quite uncomfortable. I said, Dad, come upstairs to the master bedroom. I said, I think I need to leave. Because I think John's mother thinks I did something to John.
Okay, let's listen
All right,
to
so tell me
Hank's
why I should
argument
admit
on
that.
this.
You should admit this clip because it demonstrates consciousness of guilt. On the morning of John's death, Miss O'Keefe sees her son at the hospital and goes back to Mr. O'Keefe's home. In the driveway is the alleged murder weapon, the Lexus with the broken taillight. It's the middle of a snowstorm, and a prelude to that is there is a phone call from the defendant's father to the Dighton police looking for a ride to go in and see his daughter at the Good Samaritan Hospital. He's looking for a police ride because the weather conditions are so terrible. When the Dighton Police Department declines that ride, he gets the assistance of his son, and his son's wife pick him up and bring him to the hospital. At the hospital, there are a number of comments made. I think I hit something. There is evidence we have where the defendant, her mother, and her father admittedly discuss in different ways the broken taillight. It is an issue that is primary on their mind. In this tumultuous, grieving moment, the taillight is central between these parties. Uninvited, the defendant and her father go to the O'Keefe house without invitation. They knock on the door and they ask to come in. They go into the house. There does not seem to be any interaction, at least with Peggy O'Keefe. And curiously, they go upstairs for 15 minutes.
Curiously, they go upstairs Curiously, they didn't announce that they were coming. Karen has been living at John's house for at least a year at this point. You know, what kills me about Hank Brennan, and there are many things. I mean, he is so unlikable. It's tough to take. But this is a sham. He's just throwing anything he's got at the wall, hoping that some of it sticks. If he paints her as the most horrible human being the world has ever seen, then maybe the jury will split the difference and come down in the middle. But you can't have it both ways. On one hand, he's presenting evidence that he's suggesting that she didn't have any right to be at her house, okay, where she's been living for the last year. I just also realized he's lying because Karen did call, and I think she called John's brother. I think she called Paul. And he told her that it was okay to come. Of course you could come here. Why couldn't you come here? She said, is it okay if I come by and get some of my things? And he said, yes. So the fact that he's saying she didn't announce herself, that's garbage. She did ask if it was okay to come by, which she didn't have to because she had been living there. Her things were there. Why was she going upstairs in the bedroom? I mean, this is disgusting. Like, Hank Brennan is a disgusting human being who is so compromising of his integrity that everything he says is a lie. And here's the difference between this piece of shit and the defense, okay? You don't have to like the defense, but when they defend Karen Read, they're not lying. You never get the sense that they're up there lying about what they're saying. They believe wholeheartedly in their heart of hearts that she is innocent. And this piece of shit knows what he's saying is. And how do we know that? Because on one hand, he throws all this garbage, just again, it's a big show for Hank. He just wants to ruin her reputation any way that he can, make her look bad no matter what he has to do it. Like, how could he possibly believe the garbage that comes out of his mouth? He is a bad person. That is the way that I see Hank Brennan. You are a bad man. I hope it's worth it. Whatever it is that you're getting, whatever incentives you've been given to play this little game with Michael Morrissey and Beverly Cannoni, whatever little games the DA's office has going down, hopefully it's worth it, Hank. Hopefully you get whatever it is that you want from this garbage ruse that you are playing.
And curiously, they go upstairs for 15 minutes. They stay at the house for less than an hour. This is a family that's grieving the loss of their son. Less than an hour, they go back outside. Instead of leaving in the one car, they take the alleged murder weapon, they get into two cars, and they drive away and remove the Lexus with the broken taillight from the scene. That is clear consciousness of guilt evidence, removing the murder weapon from an area where witnesses can see, photograph, identify the damage. In fact, despite the other evidence about the cracked taillight in the testimony, it is a centrally contested issue in this case. The defense is already questioned and confronted, as they have a right to do, about the shape, manner, and extent of that broken taillight. The removal of it is helpful for the defendant.
Okay, so back to my point about Hank Brennan having a clear picture in his mind of where he knows he needs to get the evidence and then making all the pieces fit the narrative he has in his mind. That is what this is. And I don't think you could possibly get a better example of that phenomenon than this. I mean, you see how he has set her up here so she can't win. He makes the case that it's inappropriate for her to be at the house to begin with, even though she's been living there for the last 2 years, and all of her things are upstairs. Then vilifies her because when she is there, she's in her bedroom where she's been sleeping with the person who just died. And this, mind you, is her coming back from the hospital where she's sectioned and on a psychiatric hold. And you've seen her. We've all seen her. You've 50 calls to John. in the middle of the night. And Hank Brennan knows that. He knows that. And then, when she doesn't stay for more than 40 minutes, he gets on her for leaving. So which is it? Is she a bad person, Hank, because she showed up at all? Or now she's a bad person because she left? Or now she's a bad person because of what she was doing while she was there? It's just ludicrous. It's ludicrous. It's just insanity. And one thing that really does give me hope, he's playing so much to the villain, that she's this villain, this evil, scheming genius. He's playing so much to that. And the first jury, what we learned after the fact about this jury, they all agreed unanimously it was not intentional. And you would think that Hank Brennan would listen carefully to that. That he would be aware of that. But instead, he's making and painting the most evil picture that he can think to paint. And I can only pray that that backfires against him. Because if I am a juror and I am listening to this man paint her as the evil villain who's scheming up the morning of John's passing, sitting and scheming up removing the car from John's house to get it away. Oh, I got to get the car out of the driveway. If I know as a juror that that is absolute bull, does that make me less likely to believe anything that comes out of his mouth? At a certain point, these people, this jury, is going to pick up on this pattern. Because we have now seen a clear pattern of behavior from Hank Brennan. There's no integrity. There's each and every argument is a new day. And the only goal in each and every argument is to win that argument. And because of that, there's no integrity, there's no continuity. He just lies his face off. I mean, he just told us, outside of the presence of the jury, thank God, that she's a bad person because she didn't call ahead to the house, to her house, mind you, to see if it was okay for her to come by after John passed away. Why would she have to do that? But the truth is, she did. She called Paul, and he said, of course you can come here. So that's a lie. And you don't think he knows that? You don't think Hank realizes that that's what happened? He's just lying. And we've seen it from the very first moment that he entered into this case.
Removing the murder weapon from an area where witnesses can see, photograph, identify the damage. In fact, despite the other evidence about the cracked taillight in the testimony, it is a centrally contested issue in this case. The defense has already questioned and confronted, as they have a right to do, about the shape, manner, and extent of that broken taillight. The removal of it is helpful for the defendant. And so the fact that they stay for less than an hour, remove the Lexus from the scene, is important. This statement by the defendant is clearly an attempt to create an excuse, a ruse, for why they removed the murder weapon from the scene. It is an attempt to suggest that she somehow is targeted. She somehow on that morning is victimized. She somehow on that morning is the intent or the object of something that is abusive from Peggy O'Keefe. And so this evidence will demonstrate a key part of our consciousness of guilt evidence on this issue, that there was no viable reason to take that evidence from the scene other than to obscure it. It was not because Peggy O'Keefe yelled at her or intimidated her or threatened her. This was, again, a central conversation between her, her father, and her mother in those early morning hours.
Listen to the contempt in his voice when he says that.
Her father and her mother in those early morning hours. This is what was foremost in their mind. And so that's why it's not only relevant, it is an extraordinarily strong piece of the consciousness of guilt evidence. And inevitably, the defense may or may not tried to provide some type of explanation or excuse, but we have a right to the full force of our proof, and this is part of it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Your Honor. With regard to the first clip, which is clip 4,
That's the only one we're discussing right now.
then in that case, now that I look at it, I see the transcript. I'll withdraw an objection. I don't care. It's not. I don't agree with anything Mr. Brennan just said. That's what consciousness is built. I think it very clearly shows the opposite. But
Okay, so there's no objection. So there wasn't an objection until I said, is there any objection to this? And then
Now, in light of Hank's argument here about consciousness of guilt, it's not bad enough that, of course, Hank is attacking Karen Reed's integrity, making up stories about how she's scheming to get the car off of the One Meadow premises, so I don't know what. How was removing the car even a factor? What was she going to do, run and have it fixed? I mean, it's absurd. If anything, that taillight, if it was really cracked, would have just gotten worse and been worse for her. So it's absurd. It's an absurd argument on its face. Then he has the audacity to bring her parents into the equation, make them seem like horrible human beings. But what I wanted to show you is this video. This video came into the last trial. This is the Ring camera footage from right outside John's house. So what I want you to see is how Karen's family, her father and her brother, deal with Karen's car just outside as they are getting ready to leave the premises. So you tell me, does this look like guilty people who are so worried about the car and the taillight? All right, so Karen's car is in the front, and she is in her brother's car in the back. You're going to see her get out of the car in just a second. And this is right outside of John's house as she's coming back from the hospital. So this is the family gathering after they find out that John is dead. What you're going to see in this circle here, there's a big snowbank. And you can tell because everybody has to walk over it or walk through it. And you'll notice that at no time is anybody crowded around Karen's right taillight to take a look. Does anybody seem concerned? Does anybody seem like, oh, geez, look at this taillight? And her father is now brushing off the back of the car, getting ready to leave, right? They're warming up the car. There's her brother climbing over the snowbank, and he goes to try to wipe off the window until he realizes that her father already got it. You see, that's what's happening here. But the point is, never at any time do you see everybody huddled around the taillight, inspecting the taillight, looking to see, geez, is it bad? Is the damage really serious? No. And why aren't they doing that? Because they just got back from the hospital. Karen Reed just lost her boyfriend of 2 years, and oh yeah, she found him freezing to death in the snow in front of Brian Albert's house. Like, the absurdity of Hank Brennan's argument is just, I don't know how that can be overlooked. It's so absurd. And if it were me, if I were in the defense, I'd be showing this video saying, geez, I don't know. Do they seem concerned about the taillight? I don't know. I don't see anybody very worried about it, and they have direct contact with the car. It's just absurd. And okay, if you want to argue that Karen Reed is the criminal mastermind who knows where the Ring camera is and is deliberately trying not to look at it, you think that her father and brother know where the Ring camera is? You think they're studying the surveillance on John O'Keefe's house? It's just absurd. It's just absurd. All right, and now we're going to see the second clip. This is outside of the presence of the jury again, and we're going to hear arguments from Hank Brennan about why this next clip is also evidence of consciousness of guilt, and then you're going to hear from the defense arguing against it. You be the judge. You decide whether or not you think this is evidence of consciousness of guilt or you agree with what the defense is saying.
you all came to sidebar. I mean, they were just going to play. So there's no objection to the first clip, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so let's hear.
I made an objection to sidebar from Your Honor.
Okay, so Mr. Brennan, play the second one, please.
Yes.
And his mother leans over the kitchen island and says to me, I think it looks like you got hit by a car. It looks like you got hit by a car.
Okay, so tell me how this comes in.
Similarly, consciousness of guilt evidence, the defendant making what we allege is a false statement to try to excuse her conduct of removing evidence of a crime from the scene. This has additional import. It has two facets to it. One, equally as important for consciousness of guilt in the first part, as I supported for clip number 4 or 5. Secondly, it is important because we've heard testimony from Peggy O'Keefe that this claim never happened. So we now have direct testimony that she did not have a conversation with the defendant, did not make these claims to the defendant. And so while also consciousness of guilt evidence, it has additional support from the previous clip.
Right, Mr. Jackson?
Thank you. With this video clip, Your Honor, it's very different. It has absolutely nothing to do with consciousness of guilt. The argument is baffling. How could that possibly be consciousness of guilt if my client is simply reiterating something that she believes somebody else said? This clip is obviously, very obviously, and strategically being used to try to vilify my client with something that's completely irrelevant. In Massachusetts, you can't call a witness just for the purposes of impeaching them. What this clip would be doing is purporting to impeach Mrs. O'Keefe, who just testified, I never said that. I never said it. I never leaned over the island counter. Never happened. So bringing this in would be used to impeach their own witness. And that's what can't be done in Massachusetts. With regard to consciousness of guilt, how does my client reiterating or stating that something that the victim's mother may or may not have said, how does that relate to consciousness of guilt? It doesn't. This is simply a wolf in sheep's clothing. They're trying to get it in because it makes my client look bad. They've just put on a very, very sympathetic and empathetic witness, John O'Keefe's mother, and they're trying to make my client, Ms. Reed, look bad by saying something, what they perceive to be pejorative, in a tone that's pejorative about that very same witness. He's trying to, at this point, there is no issue about whether or not Peggy O'Keefe leaned over and said something about the car, being hit by the car. And he's trying to create the issue so that he can put this video clip in. It has nothing to do with consciousness of guilt.
It's not for impeachment of Peggy O'Keefe. We don't take the position that Peggy O'Keefe is lying. This is a statement of the defendant.
Just after Hank makes his little contemptuous statement vilifying once again Karen Reed, watches it. The camera now goes back to Alan Jackson, and then in the background, you're going to see Paul O'Keefe. Take a close look at that.
It's in the form of an admission or a statement, which qualifies for admission substantively, not for impeachment purposes. The defendant should not be able to pick and choose which of her statements do not look good for her and do not look bad for her. She made the statements that are relevant to this case. It's not unfairly prejudicial. It's a statement that they embraced and they chose and they publicized, and it goes directly to the issue of consciousness of guilt. Just because it hurts, just because it's incriminating, just because it's difficult for the defense is not a basis to preclude it. It is an admission, a statement of the defendant. It's admitted substantively.
If that were true, Your Honor, then they would simply put in the transcript. They wouldn't need to play the video. Transcript is one line. And his mother leans over the kitchen island and says to me, I think he looks like he got hit by a car. He looks like he got hit by a car. Sorry. I think he looks like he got hit by a car. It looks like he got hit by a car.
So
just put that statement in.
watch Paul O'Keefe here in the background.
Because of the tone that it sets. It's not in evidence at this point. The witness who supposedly said the statement has denied having said it and said it never occurred. This is far, far more prejudicial than it is probative. If they want to simply use the transcript, that's one thing. But playing this video is simply being used to vilify my client because of the tone of voice she used in the clip. That's it. That's what's not allowed. That's overly prejudicial, and it's not relevant.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about this. And if I decided to let it in, you can let it in first thing tomorrow morning. I'm not going to let it in now.
May I ask for a ruling in the morning?
Yes.
May I introduce the one that was not objected to?
Yes. Do you want a consciousness of guilt instruction, Mr. Jackson?
No, we don't believe that.
So you're in agreement that that statement just comes in?
We're not objecting. I'm not trying to introduce it. Don't put words in my mouth. I'm not trying
No,
to
I said you're okay.
But I'm not objecting that it at this point that it should come in.
Okay. We'll bring the jurors back and we'll do that. Tony, can they come right in or is it?
So what Hank Brennan is doing here is he's trying to argue that this is a false statement that Karen Reed made, and therefore it constitutes as consciousness of guilt. That she was trying to come up with some story about why it is that she needed to leave the house. That is what's going on in Hank Brennan's mind, which is so distorted. Like, why would you even think that? Unless you're trying to come up with the worst possible way that you could make Karen Reed seem guilty. And here's the thing. Here's the slimy, scummiest thing about this argument. The scummiest thing. And I'm not a lawyer, and I can see right through it. Hank is very aware that there is no way for the defense to argue against that statement unless they're going to attack Peg O'Keefe to impeach her, to call her a liar on the stand, which the defense absolutely cannot do. So it's just a low blow. It's just a disgusting, dirty move on the part of Hank Brennan, who is playing to win at all costs. And by the way, probably ending his career in so doing, because this is just dirty business. Hank Brennan is very deliberately trying to say that this is consciousness of guilt because it's Karen making something look different than it is, maliciously creating stories to try to look more innocent. And I just want to speak to that for 1 minute. I want to speak to this idea Karen is talking about feeling like Peg O'Keefe was accusing her of something right off the bat, whether it was because she was leaning across the island and saying, it looks like you got hit by a car, or if it was just, I felt like she was looking at me funny and I felt like she was accusing me of doing something bad to John. Like, why'd you leave my son at a party? You know, that kind of tone. And I think we've already gotten evidence from Peg O'Keefe that she was acting that way. I mean, by her own admission, she tells us that that morning when Carrie picked the O'Keefes up and to bring them to the hospital, and Karen called Carrie, and Peg O'Keefe said to Karen, why did you leave him at a party? You left him alone. Why did you leave him alone? She was already accusing Karen. So there is already evidence of that. But here's the important additional piece here to consciousness of guilt, or to the phenomenon of guilt, the psychological phenomenon of guilt that is critical to keep in mind. When we're talking about psychology and people behaving suspiciously or behaving in strange ways because of feeling guilty, feeling the distress of the emotion of guilt, what we are actually talking about, people will feel that way under two conditions. The first condition is, did I do something wrong? So, for example, let's say that your husband cheats on you and you don't know about it. You have no idea that he's out cheating. Or let's say you cheat on your partner. They don't know about it and they don't even suspect it, but you feel terrible guilt. So in the days that follow, you're being extra nice to them. You know, you're making them breakfast in bed. You're getting them flowers, or they're getting you flowers. And so it's feeling guilty and then taking action on feeling guilty. But there's another aspect to guilt that is critical, and that is that other people might see you as guilty, the perception of being guilty. That is key, particularly for Karen Reed.
They had pulled into the driveway before me, so I was presuming she saw my cracked taillight and was thinking, did you hit my son? I could sense from her that she was looking at me very warily. And then when John's nephew came home, I just wanted to see him and squeeze him. It was quite uncomfortable. I said, Dad, come upstairs to the master bedroom. I said, I think I need to leave. I said, I think John's mother thinks I did something to John.
If you think back to A Body in the Snow, there's the moment where on the second arrest, I think it's the second arrest, the second time she gets arrested, Michael Proctor is very excited. He goes to her house and he has upgraded the charges to murder. And so he goes to arrest her, and I think Buchanan is there, Proctor's there, and she's in like boxer shorts, I think, and slippers. And she wants to go get changed. So she's saying to him, can I just please go get changed? Like, the cameras are here and they're going to see me like this. And Proctor's like, what is this woman crazy? Because, you know, I'm arresting her for murder. Is she worrying about like how she looks? Okay. One thing that we can say, I mean, this is just definitive. Like, there's no way that anyone would be able to argue this successfully, because it's just definitive. It's a fact, right? It's something that we all know from just observing Karen Read for the last 3 years, right? Or observing her for however long you've been observing her. She cares about what other people think. She cares about how she's being perceived, and she has a very astute awareness of other people's perceptions of her. That is so important, because one of the ways that the psychological phenomenon of consciousness of guilt becomes a factor in somebody's words, somebody's actions, is if they're concerned about the perception of being guilty, right? If they're concerned that so-and-so's mother is going to think I did something bad. It's not even about them actually doing anything wrong. It's the fact that other people are going to see it as though they did, and they won't be able to defend themselves. And that is exactly why Karen Read has run her mouth the way she has the last 2 years. That is why these statements exist in the first place, because she cannot stand other people seeing her as guilty of this, because she needs to tell her story. She wants to tell her truth. And if you go back and you listen again to, I just, I don't know how else to say it. Go back and listen to the testimony of Brian Albert, Colin Albert, Jen McCabe, and then watch Karen Read's statements in all of the interviews that she's given, and then come back and you tell me what's the difference. Now, yes, is Karen being, is she in a court setting? Is there a lawyer asking her questions? No, she's not being interrogated. But she is very much being interviewed with all the spotlights on her, and more aware than anybody of how what she's saying is being perceived. Because for Karen, what matters more than anything else is the perception. That is why her behavior may appear to be guilty, because she's so concerned about how she looks. And we also heard in A Body in the Snow how she talked about, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially she alludes to the fact that everyone's going to have an opinion and they're going to judge her no matter what she does. If she smiles too much, if she doesn't smile enough, if she cries, if she doesn't cry, she's aware that she can't win based on other people's perception. And while that is true, I think one of the things that we can definitively say about Karen Read is she cares a lot about what other people think. She cares a lot about perception. She cares a lot about looks, how things appear, about the more superficial stuff, right? And I'm not saying this to be judgmental. I'm saying this to try to help people understand how her behavior makes total sense in context. But if you're Hank Brennan and you have a story that you are set on, Karen Read hit John O'Keefe, whether there's evidence of that or not, and here's what happened, and I've got to make it all fit somehow, then yeah, you're going to find a way to take her statements and fit them in the order that makes the story seem more credible. That is what he is doing. That is what he is doing, soup to nuts, even so much as to take her statements and build his case, literally build his case from start to finish as though it's a story, like he's writing a book. I mean, I don't know. I see very clearly what Hank Brennan is doing here, right? He's sort of he's trying to tell a narrative. He started, the first thing he said in opening statements was, about the firefighter, like the hero's tale with the firefighter. Everything he's doing is very intentional. Why did he choose Timothy Nuttall to start? Well, because he was the hero firefighter, the innocent guy that was, heard her say, I hit him. The guy with all the integrity that doesn't have a memory, right? That can't remember anything correctly, obviously, like the big puffy coat. And now there's, 10 hit him statements and whatever. Then you have Carrie Roberts again, like the angel. She's, I'm just the do-gooder, does so good. I take care of John's kids. The do-gooder who, oh yeah, by the way, has got Jen McCabe sitting on her shoulder and has from the very first minute that Karen left her site on January 29th of 2022. So there goes Queenie. But he has a narrative and he's trying to build that story. And it is very clear to me that that is what he's doing. And the narrative all fits perfectly in Hank's mind, with Karen Reed as the big, bad, malicious, evil girlfriend who intentionally killed John. And this is the part that makes this even more ridiculous, because there is nobody believes that. Nobody, including Hank Brennan, believes that Karen Reed did this on purpose. If she hit John O'Keefe, it was an accident. You know it. I know it. Carrie Roberts knows it. Peggy O'Keefe knows it. Paul O'Keefe knows it. We all know that if she hit John, it was on accident. So this act that Hank is, the performance of a lifetime that he is putting on for us to try to make it seem like she's this big, bad, evil creature who ran down John. It's just absurd, like patently absurd, start to finish. And oh yeah, right. There's just that one small detail about the fact that like he wasn't actually hit by a car. That's just a small problem though for the Commonwealth. I mean, we have consciousness of guilt, so we don't have to worry about that. But that is exactly what Hank Brennan is doing here. He's building a story and he is trying to sell it with everything he's got. And he's going to use, sprinkled on top of this timeline, this narrative, perfectly crafted narrative. He's got all the players lined up the way he wants at the time he wants. I mentioned this before. He is a controlling man. Everything about Hank screams control freak. In fact, defense, someone needs to get this message to the defense. If they can throw Hank Brennan curveballs, he's going to come unraveled. Any opportunity that the defense gets to toss curveballs, any opportunity that the defense gets to surprise Hank Brennan, he's going to come undone. It's going to knock him so far off his game, he won't know what hit him. This man has every indicator of being overly controlling. And every time we've seen him lose his shit in the courtroom, it's when he feels like he's losing control. Watch the way he moves. Watch the way he talks. Watch the way he dresses. Everything he does, he has carefully crafted. And when it doesn't go his way is when he comes unraveled. And he comes unraveled because he's not in control, because he didn't anticipate what's coming. And now he's not prepared. So if you can knock this man off his game by throwing him curveball after curveball, you'll get the best of him. I mean, there's no question that is true. Okay. That is also a known fact. Maybe not to everybody. It is definitely a known fact to me. That I have absolutely no doubt about whatsoever. So I did not mean to say that. I wasn't thinking that when I started this video, but as I'm going through this and I'm thinking about what he's saying and how he is appearing, it is all so carefully crafted. I mean, everything about this man screams control freak. Remember what I said about him not allowing Adam Lally to introduce himself to the jury. That is a control freak. That's not just controlling tendencies. That's someone who needs to feel in control. So any chance that this defense team gets to throw curveballs at him will shake him to his core. I don't know enough about the law to know where those will be or where those opportunities are or how to make them happen. But I can promise you that that is what will definitely steer things in the defense's favor. Just 100%. Okay, so having said all of that, hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully, if you've had questions about this consciousness of guilt stuff and what it all means, hopefully I've helped to alleviate some of the questions that you've had. I certainly just have been wanting to know more about this, and so did some investigating to try to get at what it all really means. Hopefully that is helpful. And yeah, we'll be back at this again tomorrow. And God only knows what tomorrow will bring. So I will be there watching with all of you. I thank you so much, so much from the bottom of my heart for your time and your effort and attention. And I will see you again soon.
God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.